I worked the returns desk at a department store in Oslo. And last week a woman from Michigan walked in carrying 17 shopping bags from the same store. She'd been here 3 hours that morning. She dumped everything on my counter and said she needed to return it all because her suitcase was full and she hadn't left room for what she bought yesterday. I asked if something was wrong with the items. She looked confused and said no, they were great. She just ran out of space. 17 bags. It's 3 hours. I processed the return and watched her walk directly back into the store. My cousin married an exchange student from Texas. And when they moved to his apartment in Copenhagen, she arrived with 42 boxes. He lives in a 1-bedroom flat. She kept saying she'd downsized significantly for the move, and this was the essential stuff only. We spent an entire weekend trying to find places for her 19 throw pillows. She had a box labeled backup hairdryers that contained 4 hairdryers. When he asked why she needed backup hairdryers, she said it was obvious you needed 1 for each bathroom plus 1 for travel plus 1 spare. He has 1 bathroom. I'm a property manager in Berlin, and an American family rented a flat from me last year. Before they moved in, they sent me detailed questions about storage space. How many closets? What's the basement situation? Do kitchen cabinets go to the ceiling? I told them it was a standard 75 square meter apartment with normal storage. Same as every other flat in the building. They arrived with a moving container so large it blocked half the street for 2 days. The building residents filed a complaint. When I went to check on them, I found they'd rented an additional storage unit across town because nothing fit. They looked genuinely distressed and kept saying they'd gotten rid of so much before moving. I'm a tour guide in Stockholm, and I took an American couple through Gamla last month. We passed a small homeware shop, one of those places that sells handmade ceramics and linen tablecloths. And the woman went inside while her husband waited. She came out 15 minutes later, empty-handed, looking disturbed. She told me the shop only had 12 coffee mugs total, and she'd asked if they had more in the back. And the shopkeeper had looked at her like she was insane and said no. These were the mugs they had because they were made by a local potter. The woman said, but what if someone bought 6? Then you'd only have 6 mugs left. I told her that was how shops worked here. They restocked when items sold. She said this seemed incredibly risky from a business perspective and insisted the store must be struggling financially. The potter had a 3-month waiting list. My brother manages a recycling depot in Vienna. And last year an American woman showed up with her car completely full of empty storage containers. She had plastic bins, wicker baskets, fabric organizers, and about 30 identical clear containers with snap-on lids. She wanted to know where to recycle them because she was moving back to the United States and couldn't take them. My brother asked why she'd bought so many storage containers if she was only here temporarily. She explained that she'd bought them to organize her closet, then bought more to organize the containers, then bought more because the first ones didn't quite fit right. And then she'd seen different colors and thought those might work better. She said she'd spent about 400 euros. Total on containers to store things in a rented apartment for 18 months. She seemed to think this was completely logical until she saw my brother's face. I work at a municipal office in Amsterdam, and an American couple came in asking about permit requirements for building an addition to their rental apartment. I explained they couldn't modify a rental property and asked what they needed the addition for. They said storage for their recreational equipment, which they needed to buy now because it was on sale, but they didn't have room for it yet. They owned 2 kayaks, 3 bicycles, camping gear for 8 people, ski equipment, and 4 paddle boards, all purchased within their first month in Amsterdam. When I pointed out they could rent any of those items when they actually needed them, the husband got defensive and said rental fees added up over time and ownership made more financial sense. I asked how often they'd used any of it. He said they were planning a camping trip soon, probably this summer, definitely within the year. They'd been here 3 weeks. I'm a building superintendent in Lyon. And last month, I had to explain to Anne, American tenant, that she couldn't install additional closet systems in her apartment because it would damage the walls. She'd called me in a panic saying the existing storage was completely inadequate. I went to her flat and she showed me 4 suitcases full of clothes. She hadn't unpacked yet because there wasn't enough closet space. I opened her closet and it was full, so I asked if she could donate some clothes to make room. She looked horrified and said everything in there was essential and she wore it regularly. I pointed out the items still had tags on them. She said she was saving them for special occasions that hadn't come up yet, but definitely would. Then she showed me a spreadsheet on her phone where she'd tracked every clothing item she owned, categorized by season, color, and occasion. There were 247 entries. She'd lived here 2 months. My sister works at a butcher shop in Zurich, and last week an American customer asked for 15 kilos of beef. She was preparing the order when he mentioned it was just for his family for the next 2 weeks. She stopped and asked how many people were in his family. He said for including 2 small children. She politely suggested that 15 kilos was excessive, and the meat wouldn't stay fresh. He insisted their family ate a lot of beef, and they had a large freezer specifically for bulk meat storage. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of his garage freezer, which he'd shipped from America. The freezer was bigger than her entire shop's walk-in cold room. He said this was actually a small order for them because they usually bought a quarter of a cow at once. My sister sold him 3 kilos and told him to come back if he needed more. He looked disappointed and asked if there was a warehouse store nearby, where he could buy in proper bulk quantities. I'm a cashier at a supermarket in Dublin, and an American woman comes in every Saturday and buys enough groceries to fill 2 trolleys completely. She's been doing this for 6 months now. Last week I was curious and asked if she was shopping for a large family or maybe running a small restaurant. She said no, it was just her and her husband, but she only liked to shop once a week and preferred to stock up on everything. I watched her check out, and she had 12 jars of pasta sauce, 8 boxes of cereal, 20 cans of soup, and 6 bottles of salad dressing, plus produce that clearly wouldn't last a week. When I mentioned that the pasta sauce had an expiration date 3 months out, she said that's exactly why she bought so many, so she wouldn't run out before the next shopping trip. She then complained that our trolleys were too small and asked why we didn't have the larger American-style carts. I told her most people here shopped every few days for fresh items. She said that sounded exhausting and extremely inefficient. I work at a farmer's market in Barcelona. Last month, an American couple set up at my vegetable stand debating whether to buy tomatoes. The man wanted to know if I had them in bulk quantities, like a case or a flat. I explained I sold them by weight, and most people bought a kilo or 2 at most because they came back twice a week for fresh produce. He seemed confused by this and asked what people did if they wanted to make sauce or salsa in large batches to freeze. I told him most people here didn't freeze homemade sauce. They just bought fresh tomatoes when they wanted to make sauce. His wife jumped in and said that seemed wasteful because buying in bulk and preparing big batches was more economical. I asked how they'd transport a case of tomatoes back to wherever they were staying. They admitted they were staying in a hotel and didn't have a kitchen. They'd been planning to ask the hotel to store the tomatoes until they figured something out. They left without buying anything. I'm a waiter at a cafe in Copenhagen. Yesterday, an American customer asked if we had a loyalty card program. I told him no, we didn't do loyalty cards. He seemed stunned and asked how we tracked customer purchases and rewarded frequent visitors. I explained we didn't track purchases. People came, had coffee, paid, and left. He said this was a missed business opportunity because in America, loyalty programs drove customer retention and encouraged people to spend more per visit to reach reward tiers. He then pulled out his wallet and showed me 17 different loyalty cards from various American stores and restaurants. He had them organized in a special wallet divider system. He said he estimated he saved about $800 a year through strategic loyalty program management. I brought him his coffee and he paid €3 and left looking somewhat deflated that he hadn't earned any points. My uncle runs a car rental agency in Prague. And last summer, an American family rented a massive SUV for their vacation. He tried to warn them that the vehicle was too large for most European city streets and parking would be challenging. But the father insisted they needed the space for luggage and shopping. They came back 3 hours later asking to exchange it for something smaller because they'd gotten stuck trying to navigate a medieval street and caused a traffic jam. My uncle asked what they'd needed all that space for. The father explained they'd packed 7 suitcases for a 2-week trip, plus they wanted room to bring back purchases. My uncle asked what they were planning to buy that required an SUV. The father said they hadn't decided yet, but they wanted options. And he'd read that Europeans had great deals on electronics and clothes, so he wanted to be prepared. They'd brought an empty duffel bag specifically for filling with purchases. My uncle rented them a compact car, and they complained the entire time that their luggage barely fit. Work at a shipping company in Rotterdam. And we had an American customer last month who wanted to ship 43 boxes back to the United States. She'd been living here for 1 year. I started processing the shipment and noticed the boxes were extremely heavy, so I asked what was inside. She said mostly kitchen items, decorative objects, and clothing she'd accumulated. I calculated the shipping costs, and it came to nearly 3,000 euros. She went pale and said that seemed high. I explained that shipping that much weight internationally was expensive and suggested she'll sell most of it here and buy new items when she got home. She said that wouldn't work because these were special things she'd found at various markets and stores. Even though when I asked, she admitted most of it came from chain stores like H&M and Zara that existed in America. She ultimately shipped 15 boxes and looked genuinely distressed about leaving the rest behind, even though she couldn't identify what was in most of them. I'm a flight attendant based in Frankfurt, and I worked the transatlantic routes to the United States. Without fail, every flight has multiple American passengers trying to board with enormous carry-on bags that clearly exceed size limits. Last week, a woman from Boston had a bag so stuffed with purchases that the zipper was straining. I told her it wouldn't fit in the overhead bin and she'd need to check it. She protested and said she'd specifically bought items that would fit in carry-on to avoid baggage fees. I pointed out the bag was obviously oversized. She insisted it was regulation size. She'd measured it at home. And all the extra bulk was just from clever packing techniques she'd learned on YouTube. She then tried to force it into the overhead bin, and the zipper burst open, spilling approximately 30 scarves, 12 coffee table books, and several ceramic items across the aisle. While we cleaned up, she explained she'd found an incredible scarf sale in Munich and couldn't pass it up because they were 70% off. She'd bought them as gifts, even though she hadn't decided who to give them to yet. I'm a train conductor in Switzerland, and I regularly see American tourists struggling with excessive baggage on platforms. Last month, a couple from California had 8 large suitcases plus shopping bags for a 2-week trip through Europe. They'd somehow managed to get everything onto the train, but then couldn't fit it all in the luggage storage area. They started stacking bags in the aisle and on empty seats. I explained this was a safety hazard and they needed to consolidate or store some bags in the luggage car. The husband said they'd already consolidated significantly, and this was their essential stuff, plus purchases they'd made so far. I asked what they'd purchased in their first 3 days. He listed kitchen items from Germany, clothing from France, and a set of beer steins they'd found at a market because they were authentic and probably unavailable in America. I pointed out they could buy beer steins in literally any tourist shop. He said those wouldn't be authentic. They ended up shipping for suitcases home from the next station at considerable expense. I manage an estate sale company in Brussels, and we recently handled the estate of an American woman who'd lived here for 30 years. Her family came from the United States to sort through her belongings, and they were shocked by how little she owned. The apartment was immaculate, and everything fit comfortably in the space. Her daughter kept saying she'd expected much more stuff, and where were all her mother's things? I showed them the organized closets, the tidy kitchen with just enough dishes for entertaining, and the living room with carefully selected furniture. The daughter said it seemed sad that her mother hadn't accumulated more possessions over 3 decades and asked if maybe she'd been depressed or struggling financially. I pulled out the financial records showing the woman had been quite wealthy. She'd simply chosen not to fill her life with unnecessary objects. The family left taking 1 small box of photos and personal letters. Everything else went to carefully selected recipients or charity. The daughter called me a week later and said being in that apartment had made her rethink some things. But then she mentioned she'd already bought 3 new throw pillows since getting home because they were on sale.